Arlo's War. The snake's world was a silent one. Its world was a box with a glass front. It was staring at its next meal. Its meal, a rat, was staring back. The rat sat frozen with fear in the corner of the large box. It heard a soft shaking sound and answered with a few high sounds of terror. The snake was hungry and moved quickly. It was a big North American diamond-backed rattlesnake, almost 2 meters long, with enough poison in its bite to kill several men. The rat was soon dead, and the snake stretched its jaws to begin the business of swallowing its meal. Arlo Penton sat and watched through the glass as Susie ate her rat. The sight made him feel a little uncomfortable. It always did. But that, he thought, was the way of nature. And he did admire snakes. He admired their smooth beauty and their beautiful patterned skins. But most of all, he admired their deafness. Arlo had discovered some years before that snakes were completely deaf. They depended mostly on their highly developed sense of smell, and their tongues could actually taste smells from the air. As well as this, their expressionless eyes could see the heat given off by the bodies of other animals. Arlo watched with feelings of deep respect as the rat slowly disappeared down Susie's throat. The snake lived in a world without annoying, continuous noise. A silent world. To Arlo, snakes stood for beauty and perfection. He loved to watch them and admire them. If only his own world could be as silent as theirs. That was why he had caught Susie. More correctly, he had Chico, a local gardener, catch her for him. Susie had been caught in the rocky, dry land that bordered Tucson, Arizona, where Arlo lived. Chico was most casual in the way he touched dangerous snakes. Sometimes he would even eat them. "They're good to eat, and they're free," he would say. This disgusted Arlo, not because he didn't like the idea of snakes being used as food, but because he thought it failed to give the snake enough respect. Nevertheless, he was glad Chico had found Susie. She was a beauty. Arlo liked living at the edge of town. He had to drive to work, and it took him over an hour each way. It was noisy and hot, but at least he had quiet when he got home. Quiet was very important to Arlo. As a young man, he had been a soldier and had fought in a war. His mind had been damaged by the noise of loud and terrible explosions, and he had to be sent to a hospital at home to recover. He had met his wife, Maria, there. She was one of the nurses who had looked after him. He still hated noise. "Everybody talks about pollution," Arlo would say to anybody who would listen. "The way we poison our environment with this and that. Yet the one thing which really poisons the quality of our lives is noise. Everywhere you go, you hear people making noise, noise, noise. Where can you hear the birds sing these days? Not in the city, my friend. All you hear is traffic, loud radios, and people with noisy machinery. 24 hours a day, it's noise, noise, noise. It's enough to drive you crazy." Too much noise took Arlo back in his mind to the war, with its loud explosions that had brought death and suffering. Maria had saved him from madness. Maria and his work and his pills. To look at, Arlo was like many other 59-year-old men. He was of average height, and his once dark hair was now gray. He was neither fat nor thin, and dressed casually, usually in black trousers, a blue shirt, and his favorite cowboy hat. His thin face had taken on a more troubled look since Maria had died of cancer 1 year before. She had helped him through the bad times and made sure he took the pills he needed to keep him calm. But now, Maria was gone. They had no children. Most of Arlo's time was now given to his work. Even when he was at home, he would be thinking about work, putting new ideas down onto his computer. His work was his life. Arlo had a job in a company called Techno Toys, which made electronic toys for children. He was the company's chief designer of radio-controlled toys, such as cars and airplanes. These toys were so clever and amazing that many fathers bought them at Christmas for their children, only to play with them themselves. The cries of, "Aw, Dad, can I have a go now?" were often heard in many homes where Dad had bought one of Arlo's marvelous toys. His toys were indeed wonderful. The cars were tough but fast, while the airplanes were like magical birds that would fly up or down and turn in the air whenever you told them to. They could be guided from great distances with the powerful electronic controls that Arlo designed. What Arlo liked best about his work was the electrical side. He would leave the design of the toy's body to others, but design the electronic controls himself. By the time the toy was finished, it would be the best that money could buy. Arlo had a garage full of small model planes, boats, and cars he had made. He often used them to help test out new designs at home. That was why he had been allowed to keep them. The Techno Toys factory was quite separate from the place where Arlo worked. He needed quiet so that he could concentrate, and did not want loud, upsetting noises to remind him of the war. He could never do this next to a noisy factory. He did his work in an old, large house in the center of the city called the Havens, which was owned by the company. The house was unusual in having its own spacious grounds that protected it from the loud noises of the city. Arlo worked there with a few other favored employees. They would send their designs to the factory, which would build the models, then return them to Arlo and his colleagues to be checked. This arrangement suited Arlo. He had a quiet place to work in, while Techno Toys got top-quality new toys that were sure to sell well. Keeping Arlo happy at the Havens had been worth it to them. So far. Arlo had made enough money from his work to buy a spacious house outside the city and away from the noisy traffic. He built a large wooden tower in the garden so that he could control his models from great distances. He loved that. But he missed Maria, and his sleep was sometimes troubled, especially when he forgot to take his pills. But at least he had his work to take his mind off the war. Work was all he had left. Bernie DiMaggio, vice president of Techno Toys, held a towel as he watched his boss on her exercise cycle. She often spoke to him while doing her early morning exercises in the private gym she had next to her office. She got off the machine, and he handed her the towel. "He's not going to like it, Mr. Cruz. You know how he feels about the place." Bernie's suntan could not hide the way his face turned red as he spoke. "You seem to forget who you're talking to, Mr. DiMaggio. I am now the head of Techno Toys. My father was old-fashioned in his ways. He made this company, but if we are to become the market leader, we must change with the times." "But Mr. Cruz," began Bernie. "Enough, Mr. DiMaggio. You may be vice president, and your concern for one of our, senior employees is understandable. But we have a business to run. We have to progress. We have money to consider. We can't afford not to sell a valuable property like the Havens just because an old man close to retirement likes a bit of quiet. Not when we need the money for building up the factory. It's just not good business sense, Mr. DiMaggio, and we both know it. But Arlo has been working at the Havens for 20 years. He couldn't work anywhere else now. You knew him when you were just a kid, Mr. Cruz. I'm not a kid anymore, Mr. DiMaggio, in case you haven't noticed. And I have a business to run. The property will be sold. If Mr. Penton wants to continue to work for Techno Toys, he will have to work at the factory, like the rest of us. Or he can go. I trust you will let him know of this development at the appropriate time. You mean after he's completed the designs for the new season's models? Exactly. No sense in upsetting him just now, not while he's doing useful work. It's not good business, Mr. DiMaggio. You ought to know that, said Eva de Cruz firmly. Bernie DiMaggio had been with the company since Eva de Cruz had been a child. He had seen the business grow as Eva grew. It was a successful business, though not yet the biggest of its kind. He looked at his new boss, the 25-year-old daughter of Diego de Cruz, his former boss and friend. Eva had studied at the best business school, and she wanted to show the world that she was going to be better than her father had ever been. Better and richer. After Diego's wife, Eva's mother, had died 15 years before, Diego de Cruz had put all of his energies into the business. The education of his daughter and only child was left to private boarding schools, where she had lived for most of the time. She had been educated from a distance, like one of Diego's toys. And Eva was the result. Everything about her was businesslike, from her usual dark blue suit to her electronic organizer. Bernie sometimes wondered if her brain had become electronic too. And what would happen to Arlo once he was told about the sale of the Havens? Both he and Diego had been in the army with Arlo during the war and had become friends. After the war, they had given Arlo work he could do in peace. They wanted to help him put his broken mind back together. Diego had promised Arlo that there would always be a peaceful place for him to work at Techno Toys. What would this news do to him? "Couldn't you find somewhere else quiet for him, Mr. Cruz?" Bernie asked, "where he can carry on his work? Diego, your father, promised Arlo somewhere quiet a long time ago." "That was then. This is now. We can't afford to treat him any differently from the rest of us, Mr. DiMaggio," she said, after drying her face with the towel and throwing it back to him. "Now, excuse me, but I have another appointment in 20 minutes." Eva left him with the damp towel. Bernie was close to retirement age himself. He felt sorry for Arlo. Diego would have done something to help, but not Eva. He might lose his own job if he didn't do as she told him. Bernie felt older and weaker as he walked out of the gym. While Eva and Bernie were talking, Arlo was getting into his car to go to work. He had forgotten to take his pill again. His face was already sweating. It was a bright, sunny morning, and the roads would be hot. He was glad he had completed the new designs and was looking forward to handing them in personally, as usual, to Bernie DiMaggio. They lay on the seat next to him as he drove to the city center. The road was already busy with the morning rush of traffic. Arlo had to stop at a set of traffic lights. The car next to him was a sports car with an open top. The man at the wheel was young and wore dark glasses. He was listening to loud rock music and was nodding his head to the rhythm as he listened. Arlo could not understand how anybody could listen to such a loud noise without damaging their ears. He could feel the noise hitting his own head in solid waves, It was painful. He shouted to the man to turn the sound down. The man saw him and laughed, then turned the sound up even more. Fortunately, the lights changed at that moment, and they both drove away. Arlo let the sports car speed ahead, taking its noise with it. Everything seemed to be noisy on that journey. Other cars had noisy radios. Arlo swore at the Tucson rock music radio station as he passed it by. Then he heard some loud machines at some new building works. Car horns sounded at every pause in the stream of traffic, and everywhere people seemed to be shouting, shouting, shouting. At last, the turning for the Havens came into view. He could hardly wait to enter the peaceful building. As he drove through the private grounds, all the awful noises disappeared into the distance. When Arlo stopped the car, his body was shaking and covered in sweat. Echoes of loud noises were still in his head, some of them terrible memories of the war. He took a few deep breaths to calm himself, then picked up his designs and walked into the big house. It was 9 o'clock at the Havens. Bernie DiMaggio was early. He was waiting in the office as Arlo walked in. He noticed that Arlo was holding the envelope containing the new designs. He also noticed how upset Arlo looked. "Hi, Arlo. Hey, are you okay? You don't look so good, if you don't mind me saying so. Are you still sleeping okay? Hey, if you need anything, just say the word." Arlo smiled. Bernie was always concerned about him when it was time to hand in his designs. Did he think he would finally go crazy before completing them? Probably. Bernie had always been a worrier. Arlo looked into the familiar, sun-tanned face and answered, "I'm fine, Bernie. At least, I would be if I walked around with my ears closed. I swear this town is getting noisier every day." "Oh, no," thought Bernie. "I hope he's not going to give me another long talk about noise pollution." Bernie decided to change the subject quickly. "You have the designs, I see, Arlo. All ready for production?" Arlo handed over the envelope, giving it a firm tap with his hand on the way. "You bet, Bernie. This one is going to be a winner, I'm telling you. The kids are going to love it. It's easy to control, yet it's as quiet as a baby asleep in its mother's arms." "Everything's checked?" asked Bernie. "Checked and double-checked," Arlo answered. "You ought to know me by now." Bernie did know. If Arlo said something was ready, it was ready. He put the designs in his briefcase and began to walk toward the door as he thanked Arlo. Then he stopped and turned to him, pulling another smaller envelope from his jacket pocket. "Oh, I almost forgot," said Bernie, though he had done no such thing. "Here's some mail from the factory for you." "What is it?" Arlo asked as he took the envelope. Bernie looked at his watch. He wasn't brave enough to face Arlo's reaction to the sale of the Havens. "Hey, I've got to go to a meeting right now. See you later, okay?" "Okay," said Arlo, as Bernie smiled nervously and left. He sure was in a rush, he thought. Maybe the noise has been getting to that guy, too. I wouldn't be surprised. Nothing surprises me anymore. Arlo sat down with a sigh and opened the envelope. Eva de Cruz tested her coffee. It was black, with no sugar, just as she liked it. As she sat at her office desk, she thought that things, on the whole, could be a lot worse. It had been a month since the old man had left them. She had expected him to make a lot more fuss about the whole business. She knew he would never work in the factory grounds, not with his unreasonable attitude towards perfectly normal noise levels. All the other designers had agreed to the new arrangements. She couldn't change the world just because one employee had had some unfortunate experiences in the war. That wasn't her problem. Besides, the Havens had been knocked down by the new owners. They had already started to build a new radio station on the grounds. It was going to be the biggest rock music radio station in Arizona. Techno Toys had made a lot of money out of the sale. And if the old man didn't like it, well, that was just too bad. Eva de Cruz had known Arlo for most of her life. She had even played with some of the toys he had designed while they were in the testing stage. She had loved the toys, but the man who designed them was, to her, just a strange old man who hated noises. She had never been close to him, though she had liked his wife. Maria was nice. It was true that the old man had been a first-class designer, but nobody is so good that he can't be replaced, especially if they're half crazy and more trouble than they're worth. Besides, the company had already made a lot of money from his designs. There were plenty of excellent young designers already applying for his job. They weren't troubled by noise at all. They were cheaper, too. No, there will be no problem replacing Arlo Penton, Eva thought to herself as she poured out a second cup of coffee. No problem at all. Arlo had given up his job as soon as he had read the letter. There was no way he was going to work in that noisy factory. He had enough money saved. He could take care of himself all right. He didn't need false friends who broke their promises. He could manage alone. That's what he kept telling himself. But it was a month since he had left his job, and the noises in Arlo's head were getting worse. He often forgot to take his pills now. Sometimes he would wake up in the early hours of the morning covered in sweat and screaming at the ceiling. Only now there was no Maria to help him get over the nightmare. His memories of the war had returned, and he was alone in the middle of them. To Arlo, it seemed that the guns were firing again. The guns in his head and the sounds outside were joining together. The difference between memories and reality was breaking down in his mind. When he went out in the car for his groceries, he would hear the guns. Every loud radio, every noisy machine seemed like an exploding bomb to his ears. He wondered why something wasn't done about it, but nothing ever was. And all the time, the noise was there. Why didn't people notice what was going on? Were they all deaf? He could hear the enemy. His enemy was noise. He had to do something, or he would go crazy. Nobody else seemed to be doing a thing about it. It was all up to him. He would have to stop the noise. But how? "That ought to be enough," said Arlo. It was 1 week later, and he had decided what he would do. He had been making the tower he had next to his house higher and stronger, so that he could increase the range of the radio signals to his models. He placed his electronic equipment on top of the tower, and the higher he built it, the better his electronic equipment worked. He now had more control over his wonderful models than ever before, with a range that allowed him to fly them high over the city. Arlo had a wide variety of models to choose from. He had, over the years, collected over 100 models in his garage. They were all in perfect working order. Techno Toys had let him keep them. He had tiny television cameras fitted to his models. This allowed him to see on his computer screen indoors where his models were while they were in use, even when it was cloudy or too hot for him to go outside. Arlo had learned a lot about how to make explosives during the war. He could attach a small but powerful explosive onto a model and then, from the comfort of his own home, direct it to a target. The video cameras would show him exactly where his target was. All he had to do was aim the model, usually an airplane, towards the target, and boom! The target was destroyed. Nobody suspected anything. Arlo, after all, was just working on his models, like he always did. No one knew that he was making bombs as well. Chico called by with more rats for Susie. He saw Arlo working in his garage, where Susie lay sleeping in her glass-fronted box. Chico liked Arlo, even if he didn't eat snakes. He stopped to watch in admiration while Arlo flew one of his wonderful models high into the sky. He had no idea that Arlo's campaign against the enemy had begun. Arlo's first bombing campaign was against the old Tucson rock music radio station. It was successful. Just one small model airplane had delivered enough homemade explosives to bring down the radio station's tower. It was easy. They wouldn't be playing loud music from that station for some while. Tucson's local papers all published stories about a strange explosion that had blown up essential equipment at the local rock radio station. Nobody had been hurt in the explosion, they said, but the station would be out of action for a long time. The police could see no motive for the crime, but did not reject the idea of some individual playing around with explosives for fun. This was worrying. They were right to be worried. Over the next week, there were several more explosions. Large, noisy machines on building areas were destroyed, and a fireworks factory was seriously damaged. But nobody had been hurt. Not yet. It was a few days after the explosion in the fireworks factory, and Sheriff Calhoun was in the office of the Vice President of Techno Toys. He badly wanted a cigarette. He was trying to give up again, and had not brought any cigarettes with him. Worse still, none of the other officers smoked, so he couldn't even get a cigarette from one of them. This was making him bad-tempered, but he had a job to do. He stuck another piece of chewing gum into his mouth. "Tell me again, Mr. DiMaggio." The sheriff paused as he softened the fresh gum in his mouth. "You told me, when you rang me on the telephone earlier, that this guy, what was his name?" "Arlo Penton, Sheriff." "Yeah, Arlo Penton. You said he had been one of the top designers at Techno Toys?" "The best we had. That's him in the picture on the wall just there. He's the one holding the model Mustang fighter plane. That's our biggest selling model, and he designed it." Sheriff Calhoun looked at the picture in Bernie DiMaggio's office. Bernie liked to keep photographs of all of Techno Toys' best toys with their designers. Arlo featured in a lot of them. In this one, Arlo was smiling and looked happy and relaxed. "And you got rid of the guy?" asked the sheriff. "No, Sheriff. It was his choice. He left the company a few months ago." The sheriff recognized a note of guilt in Bernie's voice. Years of listening to countless interviews had trained his ears to know when somebody was trying to hide something. That was what he was hearing now. "With less than a year to go before he was due to retire? He sure must have had a reason. Can you think of a reason, Mr. DiMaggio? After all, you say you've known him a long time. Not that I'm accusing anybody of anything, you understand, but I have to ask these things." Bernie had felt bad about the way the promise he and Diego had made to Arlo had been broken. He felt bad about his own weakness before Diego's daughter, his boss, who had not respected that promise. He knew that Arlo must have been disturbed by the loss of the Havens, but he hadn't been brave enough to talk to Arlo about it after he had given him the letter. Could Arlo have used his expert skills to make these explosions? Bernie told the sheriff everything about Arlo, about Techno-Toys and the Havens, and how he thought Arlo might be responsible for the explosions. Bernie felt glad to have finally told somebody how he really felt about things. "So, what will happen to Arlo now?" Bernie asked. "Now, hold on, Mr. DiMaggio. You may have given us a motive for Mr. Penton, but we don't know that he did any of these things. There have been a number of explosions at the Tucson radio station, some heavy machines blown up, and one a few nights ago at a fireworks factory. That caused serious damage, but we can't be sure that any one person is responsible for all of these crimes. For all we know, there may be any number of people out there making their own bombs." "But you don't really think so, do you, Sheriff?" Bernie asked. Sheriff Calhoun took a few more thoughtful chews of his gum and wished he had a cigarette. He looked again at the photograph of Arlo. Suddenly, he noticed a model airplane, like a child's toy, fly past, and before he could reply, there was a loud bang from outside. Bernie rushed to his window to look. "Sheriff, it's the factory! It's on fire!" Arlo had been working hard. He could not see the results of his work immediately because the television cameras were destroyed once his models hit their targets. He had to listen to the radio for news of his work. Not the loud music stations, of course. His last action had been against the electrical generator at the Techno-Toys factory. Without the generator, they would not have the power to work their loud machines, and the hated factory noise would be silenced at last. Unfortunately, though the action had been a success, 3 people had been badly burned. He heard about them on the radio. It upset him. "But it's not my fault," he told himself. "This is war. Every war hurts some innocent people. It's the enemy's fault, not mine. Once the enemy is defeated, there will be peace. I have to fight on for peace. There's nobody else. I have to." But Arlo had no peace. His heart was saddened by the news of the 3 injured people, and the noises that disturbed him had not been silenced. The enemy was strong, and there was much work left to do. He made his way to the garage again. Arlo began working immediately. He had to do the next one right. He had no idea that the sheriff and a large number of police officers were, while he was working, speeding towards his house in their cars. All he was concerned about was putting the finishing touches to his model Mustang fighter plane. He had saved the Mustang for the new radio tower they were building at the place where the Havens used to be. They would never finish it. No way, not if he could help it. It would not need much explosive, just enough to bring the tower down. That would be enough. He got his little computer ready as he switched on the video camera attached to the model airplane. It was time to fly. Arlo placed the Mustang on the ground by his garage, then sat down by his controls. He did not see the sheriff's men, but they saw him. They had positioned themselves some distance away from him. They all had powerful guns. They saw the Mustang as it started to take off. A shot was fired before the model had gone far enough to leave the ground. There was an explosion. Arlo felt a force hit his ears, and he was knocked to the floor. There was a pain in his arm. He had closed his eyes. Was he dead? Had the enemy beaten him? He opened his eyes and saw that his arm had blood on it. As he started to get himself up, Arlo didn't see the pieces of broken glass on the floor behind him. He didn't notice the angry shaking sound of the snake whose sleep had been disturbed. He hardly felt Susie's bite before he sank to the floor again. His eyes felt heavy as the daylight turned to darkness, and death ran with the poison in his blood. But he was happy. Arlo's world was, at last, a silent one.
Open doors. Kathy Page had been blinded at birth. She had been born 2 months early, and at that time, doctors had not yet realized that giving a new baby pure oxygen to breathe would destroy the sensitive nerves at the back of its eyes. But that was then. Kathy Page was now a leading journalist in British radio. She was best known for her intelligent but tough interviews of public figures and people in the news. A recent interview was typical of her style. "So, your election promise to uncover political dishonesty, does that include the bribing of government ministers?"
Of course, this government will not tolerate dishonesty of any sort.
Would that include the money you received from foreign businessmen and didn't tell your government about?
That was a misunderstanding. I can explain everything.
Can you explain the government contracts given to those same businessmen shortly afterwards?
Well,
Thank you, Minister. And now over to the news desk. Kathy Page had no patience with any attempts to hide the truth. She had a voice that was gentle and calm, almost motherly at times, which men found attractive. Nearly everybody she interviewed tended to relax more when she spoke. That was when Kathy was at her most effective. More than one politician had cause to be sorry for a careless reply to the relaxing manner of her voice. Kathy knew better than most people how to listen to the human voice. She couldn't see all the little tricks people sometimes used with body language and the expressions on their faces to give false ideas of their real feelings. She could only hear what they said. It was almost impossible for the people she interviewed to hide the tiny changes of expression in their voices that showed what they really thought. No matter how hard they tried to cover it up, she could always tell when a person was feeling uncomfortable and could usually understand the reason why. Kathy would be kind to guests who were not used to being the center of attention. For example, she understood the natural shyness of an old lady who had been given a prize for her work with the poor. But if she thought a guest was lying, she would not stop questioning until she had discovered the truth. If a lie had been told, she always made sure her listeners knew it. Politicians and businessmen often thought that somehow they could fool her. They rarely did. Kathy was too good at her job for that. Her listeners loved her. She was their star. They knew that if anyone could find out the truth, it was Kathy Page. Kathy had been in the business of radio reporting for 30 of her 50 years in the world. She was happy in her work. She had never married, though she was often told that she was attractive. She was. Her black hair was long and shiny, without a touch of grey. Her face was pretty without being weak, and the few lines which showed made it more interesting. Many hours of yoga had kept her figure in good shape. No, she was not short of male admirers. Occasionally, She would allow one to take her to dinner if he could hold an interesting conversation, but she mostly preferred the company of her colleagues, her books, and Trudy, her much-loved 6-year-old guide dog. She loved music and the arts. She regularly went to the theatre for old as well as new productions. It was a favourite activity of hers. The only thing she ever regretted was that she could not see paintings. She had read a lot about great artists and their work, and often wished that she could see a great painting, even if it were just for a short while. But then she would put away such thoughts. They were silly and senseless. It would never happen. Television producers had often, over the years, tried to get Cathy to present her own chat show on television. They knew she was a favourite with the public, and they wanted to attract the large audience that such a show would surely bring. Cathy always turned them down. She felt at home with the radio. It didn't matter what you looked like. It was what you said that you would be judged by. That's what she always told everybody. And besides, Cathy Page, the queen of radio interviews, was shy about her appearance.
She turned you down? Again? Are you sure you told her just how much money we're offering?
Mick Dean, the current favourite of his television company, waved his other arm around as he held the telephone. There was nobody else in the office, but he waved anyway. It was just a way of showing his feelings. He couldn't understand how anybody could turn down an offer like this. He had had similar conversations before, all about Cathy Page.
Okay, but don't give up. Try again in a week. Yes. Bye.
Mick Dean put the telephone down. He was the company's youngest producer and was responsible for many of its newest and most successful shows. He was particularly good at producing chat shows and more serious shows that interviewed people in the news. He believed that a lively argument was the best way to entertain viewers. It would make more people watch the next time.
They like to see a good fight, he would always say. And they like fighters.
That was why he had always wanted Cathy Page to present one of his shows.
Not only is she a good fighter, she looks great too, and people respect her. She'd be a sure winner, and I want her before anybody else gets her.
Yet again, his best man had failed to persuade Cathy to join him. But Mick Dean was not the kind to give up. He had not been the first producer to try to win Cathy Page over to television, but he was determined to be the last. Cathy's radio show was one of the most popular shows on the station. She would interview people in the news and deal with serious issues. As well as the usual politicians and businessmen, she often spoke to artists, writers, and scientists. The shows got more interesting for the listeners when Cathy questioned her guests, especially when the guests said things that Cathy found hard to believe. That really made things exciting. It was getting towards the end of her morning show, and her final guest was coming on. He was an American scientist, Dr. Woodrow Percival, who was an expert in eye surgery. He interested Cathy because he had said that he could replace damaged eye nerves with tiny computer chips that would work just as well as real nerves, perhaps even better. Cathy took a personal interest in this. He had said, in fact, that he could make the blind see. What's more, he had said that he could make her see. Cathy had come across other experts before. Sometimes they were more interested in getting publicity for themselves than in telling the truth, saying that a small discovery was greater than it really was. If this guy had any real doubts about his methods, Cathy thought, she would know it. It was wrong to raise the hopes of people who might otherwise have accepted their disability and got on with their lives. If he was offering false hope to people, he should be found out, and she was just the person to do it. She introduced Dr. Percival to her listeners and began. Dr. Percival, you're going to give a talk later today about your new treatment. Could you, in simple language, explain how this treatment works?
Certainly.
And that was exactly what he did. Cathy was waiting for any little changes in his voice that might suggest that he was not sure about what he was saying. His voice was calm. It was not the voice of an old man. He was 40, but it had a quality that suggested strength of character. She questioned him at frequent intervals, listening carefully for any signs that might show his answers to be false. There were none. Everything Dr. Percival said was said in a way that suggested he was being completely truthful. All of his answers were clear and open. Cathy could find no fault with the man's voice or his reasoning. Finally, she asked the question she knew all her listeners were waiting for. Dr. Percival, you said that you could give me the means to see. That was a very personal thing to say. Were you being serious? Cathy listened. He had been good so far. If he was going to show weakness, it would surely be now.
Miss Page, let me apologize.
This is it, thought Cathy. He's going to weaken. He knows he can't seriously support the things he says he can do.
For what the papers reported, they named you in particular when, in fact, I had only used you as an example. What I actually said was that people whose nerves had been damaged, in the way yours had, for example, could be helped by my treatment.
But Cathy, though she heard no sign of doubt in his voice, wanted him to be very exact with his answer. She knew her listeners expected no less. Dr. Percival, are you saying that you could make me see?
Well, I'd have to see your medical records in more detail, but I think so. Yes. Yes, I could.
It was time for the end of the program. Cathy thanked her guests, and the closing music was played. She felt excited, yet guilty for feeling that way. She had always thought that even if she had been given the chance to see, she would choose not to, not after a lifetime without sight. But at that time, there had been no hope. There had been no point in hoping. Hope was like a door shut, and with no key to open it. Ever. But now, this doctor sounded sure of himself. She was certain of that. For the first time since she was a girl, she allowed herself the hope of sight. She found that she did want to see. She wanted to see those pictures in the museums, the faces of her friends, the sky at dawn and the stars at night. She realized she wanted it very much indeed. Dr. Woodrow Percival had to rush off to his talk. He thanked her and left. Cathy heard the door of the studio close behind him. She knew that he might hold the key to doors that had been closed to her since birth. Could those doors really be opened for her? She knew she had to find out. The newspapers the next day were full of headlines about the interview. Famous blind radio star promised sight by American expert. Will this man give Kathy Page her sight? Go for it, Kathy. The readers and listeners loved it. Mick Dean loved it. He immediately offered to pay all the costs involved if Kathy would work for his television company for just a few shows. But Kathy hated all the publicity. She was not afraid to speak up for her listeners, but she hated the idea of strangers making unwanted investigations into her private life. And this, as far as she was concerned, was a very private matter indeed. She refused all interviews on the subject and turned down Mick Dean's offer straight away. She thought it was nobody's business but her own, and that was final. No further mention was made of the subject on her show. Guests were asked not to raise the matter. They agreed, largely because they respected Kathy and could understand her situation. But Kathy had been busy. She didn't want the world to know about her personal life, so she had arranged to meet Dr. Woodrow Percival again in private. She met him at the house of her agent, away from her home and safe from the eyes of the public. Kathy was a wealthy woman. She had made, over the years, a lot of money from her work. She could afford the cost of the operation in Dr. Percival's hospital in California, USA. Dr. Percival was as calm as ever and was glad to help her. He drank his tea as he sat in an armchair, looking at Kathy as she fed Trudy a biscuit. "I must repeat," he said, "that you'll be the first person to receive this treatment. It has worked in all the tests and all the computer trials. Having said that, I must also remind you of the risk involved." "I understand, Dr. Percival," Kathy answered quickly. "I'm willing to take that risk. This is something I've made up my mind about. If it works for me, it'll work for others. It'll be worth it." "Now, don't misunderstand me, Miss Page. By risk, I don't mean to your life. That risk is no more than it would be for any other operation. I mean the risk to your hopes. I am confident the operation will work, but I'm not God. Nobody can say for certain that you will have the use of your eyes at the end of all this. All I can say is there is no reason I can see why the operation shouldn't be a success. Are you still sure you want to go through with it?" Kathy took a deep breath, then answered, "Absolutely sure. When can you start?" The operation took place 1 month later at the hospital in California. Dr. Percival thought the operation went well. All that was needed now was a few weeks for the tiny computer parts to join with Kathy's sensitive, damaged eye nerves. During that time, Kathy would need to rest in bed with a bandage over her eyes. Her brain would be checked regularly. When it showed signs that the eye nerves were working, they would take the bandages off. In those few weeks, Kathy had plenty of time to think about what she had done. There were moments of doubt, almost panic, when she asked herself if she had done the right thing. She thought she had long since put away the foolish hopes for sight she had once held as a girl. Yet here she was, hoping like a girl again. She felt afraid, yes, but also excited at the thought of entering a world that would be totally new to her. A world where she could see. It would be like being born a second time. She wondered what colour would be like. Although it was a word she had often used and heard before, she had never experienced colour. She just could not imagine it, no matter how hard she tried. Cathy gave up trying and waited patiently for the day her bandages would be removed. The day came. Dr. Percival decided that Cathy's brain signals were doing all that he had expected of them. Things looked very promising. It was time to see if the operation had been a success. He closed all the curtains in Cathy's room so that the light was low. He turned to her and spoke. "Now, Cathy, we have to take things slowly. Even if things go well, you won't have full eyesight to begin with. First of all, let's see if your eyes are recognizing light. I'm going to take the bandage off and hold a light in front of your eyes. If you can see anything, you won't need me to tell you. You'll know. But you won't see anything clearly yet. That will come later. Are you ready?" Cathy nodded. Dr. Percival held a small light in front of her eyes as a nurse slowly and carefully removed her bandages. Cathy sat up with her eyes still closed. Slowly she opened them and stared at the light. Quickly she turned her face away.
Ow! What was that? It felt strange. There's something there, trying to get into my head.
Dr. Percival told the nurse to replace the bandages and then turned to Cathy.
"Cathy," he said with obvious delight, "that something is light. You've seen light for the first time. Congratulations. You can see."
Cathy could tell from his voice that he was pleased. She felt confused.
"But I thought there would be more to it than this. I mean, oh, I don't know what I mean."
"Don't worry, Cathy," he said as he smiled.
"All you saw then was pure light. It'll take a while for your eyes to get used to seeing colors and shapes. Your brain has a lot of sorting out of new information that it has never had to deal with before. It's bound to take a little while, even with the advanced training methods I've developed. The main thing is that you can see."
"I can see," said Cathy softly. And underneath her bandages, she was crying. Over the next few weeks, Cathy was progressively allowed to use her eyes more often. Soon, she could tell dark from light. Then she could recognize colors and shapes. But for a while, she found it very difficult to deal with the huge amounts of extra information that her new sense was giving her every day. One of her most difficult problems was judging distance. She found it hard to tell the difference between near and far objects. She would reach out for things across the room as if they were near to her, or she would walk into close objects without realizing how near they were. But Dr. Percival was patient. Cathy was taken on walks around the hospital gardens, taken for drives in the car, and shown videos and television programs. Her eyes were gently exercised until they worked well.
"In fact, Kathy," Dr. Percival told her, "your eyes are better than mine are. I need glasses and you don't."
What Kathy enjoyed most was seeing the pleasing effects shapes and colours produced. She would see ordinary things as objects of great beauty, the black and white squares on a chessboard, the shape of a hand, the colours of a flower. Sounds, for the first time in her life, took second place. Colours and shapes now filled her mind with pleasure beyond her powers to describe. But most of all, she was deeply fascinated by the changing expressions on the faces of people. She viewed every face she saw as a new world to explore, full of things to be discovered. Every smile, every frown was wonderful to her. When Kathy finally left the hospital, it was as if she were leaving home for the first time. She was nervous but excited, and her heart felt light as she opened the door to leave. Of course, all the newspapers were soon full of the story.
"American surgeon gives sight to blind woman. The gift of sight.
Kathy Page can see. Brilliant American doctor performs miracle operation." Woodrow Percival had tried to keep things quiet, at least until he was sure that Kathy had recovered fully from the operation. But he couldn't stop the news from spreading any more than he could stop the sun from rising. Soon he had film companies wanting to make a movie about him, publishers wanting his life story, and a long line of newspapers and magazines wanting interviews. The scientific community wanted to honor him, while businessmen saw many ways of marketing his ideas. Dr. Woodrow Percival's future was looking very bright indeed. Kathy wanted to rest at home. There was plenty for her to do there. For the first time in her life, she could actually see her most valued possessions. Best of all, she could see her friends for the first time. And, of course, her dear dog, Trudy, who had had to stay at home while she had been away. Kathy discovered that the human face had a powerful effect on her feelings. It was as if there had been a great hunger in her life that had been so much a part of her that she had never questioned it. Not until now. She had never before realized what a smile looked like, and it often moved her to tears to see her friends smiling. Then there was her taste in clothing. Before, she had always had to depend on the judgments of others to provide her with clothes that felt comfortable but looked smart. When she looked in her wardrobe, she saw nothing but dark colours or pale things that looked like they had no colour at all.
"They've got to go,"
she said, as she took some of the clothes out and threw them onto the floor. She was determined that from now on she would only wear clothes that were in colours she liked. After all, she could now decide for herself what clothes she could wear. She arranged to go shopping with Carla, her agent, the very next day. Trudy came too. Kathy had still not fully learned how to judge distances very well, and Trudy was almost as useful to her now as she had been before. Kathy enjoyed choosing her new clothes. She was surprised at how good she looked in them. It was a feeling she liked. As Kathy was paying for them, Carla, who had a particular interest in fashion, said,
"Well, Kathy, you've certainly brightened up your wardrobe now. I like the new look. It suits you."
Kathy had bought clothing that was food for her eyes. Her clothes had always been rather dull before, more than she had realized. These new clothes were colourful and cheerful. They made her feel happy. Kathy found that she was watching a lot of television. She had never really bothered with it before. Now she watched it with deep interest. Quiz and game show presenters and singers smiled all the time against a background of bright colours. Their smiles made them seem to be such lovely, honest people. Yet on the few occasions she had listened to such shows before her operation, she had thought they sounded stupid and shallow. It was confusing, but she was almost too happy to care. Almost. Kathy discovered that she could now dream in colour, and with pictures too. Before this, her dreams were made of sounds, voices, and music. Now she could also see in her dreams, and she was delighted. She took up photography and loved to see how pictures from life could be caught by the camera, like frozen pieces of memory. The next thing to do was to go to a museum with Carla to see paintings by great artists, just as she had always wanted. She could hardly wait. Kathy was used to getting up early. She loved the colours of the early morning, and she planned to visit as many London museums as she could during the day. By 8:30 in the morning, she had had her breakfast and was dressed and ready to leave. The doorbell rang. Kathy went to the door. She was expecting to see Carla, but it wasn't Carla. It was a young man who was smiling at her. He had a nice smile, she thought. "Hello, Miss Page. We've met before. You may remember me from the television studios. My name is Mick Dean." Kathy had not been to a studio since before her operation. She had decided to take at least 1 year off work, no matter how the operation turned out. She had been thinking of writing a book about her life. It would be a challenge, and she liked challenges. But now she had a new challenge. Mick Dean had given her a television show of her own to present. He had wanted her to do it so much, he had told her, that he just had to talk to her himself, and that was exactly what he had done. He had just turned up at her door. It was totally unexpected. She probably would not have spoken to him otherwise. Kathy decided she liked him for it. She had never really taken much notice of Mick Dean before. In fact, she remembered that he had sounded far too sure of himself for her liking. But she must have been mistaken. He had offered her her own show where she could interview people in the news. He had looked so honest and enthusiastic about it that she thought she really ought to give the show a chance. And he had such a nice smile. His teeth were lovely and white, apart from the shiny gold one at the side, which was rather attractive. And his eyes! She had never realized that eyes could be so colourful. His eyes were a lovely blue, with a few fine little red lines around the white parts. Kathy decided she would do the show, just one, to see what it was like. 3 months later, the show was ready and about to start. Kathy had soon got used to all the things that went on in a television studio. All the lights, the people who were needed to make sure everything worked right, and, of course, the excited studio audience waiting for the show to begin. Kathy was behind the scenes, wearing her new cheerful clothes and drinking a cup of tea. She was reading Braille notes with her fingertips. It was still quicker than trying to read written notes about her first guest, an aging actor called Archie Mason. He had written a book about his life in which he had told his readers all about his wives, his lovers, and the famous actors he had known. He had given away a great many details about their private lives and the kinds of things they did. This had, of course, guaranteed big sales of his book. Cathy was sure that much of what he had written wasn't true, and her aim in the interview was to make him admit it. When the show began, Cathy was given a warm welcome. The audience was glad to see her back, though there were a few surprised looks at her colourful choice of dress. Archie Mason was introduced, and he made his entrance. He was a man in late middle age, with dark hair, a moustache, and dressed in a smart blue suit with a red tie and white shirt. He was still handsome, and knew it as he smiled at the audience with his perfect white teeth, waving and showing an expensive gold watch on his wrist. He then turned his smile to Cathy as he gave her a kiss on the cheek before sitting down. "He has a nice smile," Cathy thought as she looked at his perfectly shaped teeth. She liked to see things that were bright and evenly shaped. Cathy at once started to question Archie Mason about some of the more doubtful details of his book.
"I swear to you, Cathy, that nothing in my book is untrue. Honest,"
said Archie, as he smiled and showed his white teeth. Cathy's ears were hearing a voice that did not sound honest at all, but her eyes saw a big, warm smile that looked open and truthful. Her brain listened to her ears, but her heart looked at the smile. It was hard to believe that a man with a smile like that could ever lie. For the first time during a live interview, she doubted her judgment. She decided to believe him. From that moment on, she was no longer sure of her own judgment. To the audience, it seemed as if Archie was the one in control, not Cathy. So long as he gave her a big smile, he could say whatever he liked. Cathy simply nodded and said, "Yes," and "Really?" to him. This was not what the audience expected. Where was the Cathy Page they knew? She should have known right away how to deal with a self-important old fool like this. Her next guest was a politician who had broken some of his election promises. At least everybody thought she would sort him out. He was more like what she was used to. But the politician had been prepared well. He had a boyish look, though he was well over 40. But most of all, he had a nice smile. She didn't know what to think of all the different signals she was getting from this man. His voice told her not to trust him, while his smile told her he was honest. She could no longer trust her judgment. She felt confused. The politician said almost anything he wanted. Cathy knew she should have been asking more questions, but she just didn't have the confidence in her abilities anymore. She was too slow, and the politician was too quick. After the show, Cathy knew she had done badly. She felt terrible. She was not surprised when she heard, not long afterwards, that her show would not be put on again. She heard no more from Mick Dean. Cathy finally found the time to write her autobiography. She began it soon after her appearance on television. It took her almost a year, but it became a huge success and made her a lot of money. Once again, she was in public demand. Because of her renewed popularity, she was asked by a different producer to make another television show. She turned down the offer. She didn't want to go through that again. Instead, she decided to return to radio, and soon her old show was back. Kathy wanted to show her fans that she was as good as ever. As her first guest, she chose the politician she had interviewed during her disastrous television show. Naturally, he expected an easy time of it again. He smiled as he looked at Kathy across the table. He didn't smile for long. "Could you tell us, Minister, about your promise to reduce unemployment?" she asked him. The minister began. "Of course, Kathy, but you must realize these things take a long time." "Oh, really? That's not what you said last month." She then went on to tear him apart, taking each of his promises in turn and showing how they had all been broken. He was, before a listening audience of millions, shown to be false and dishonest, just as she had first thought. This was what her listeners had been waiting for. As the politician left, Kathy sat back and took off the black scarf she had tied around her head to cover her eyes throughout the interview. Kathy Page, the queen of radio interviews and star of her listeners, was back.
A gentle touch. The touch of Mr. Lowe's needle felt gentle as a feather, as it was stuck into Jamie's right ear. Jamie was surprised that he felt no pain, only a little itch. That wasn't too bad. He did not complain as 2 more needles were put into position. Then the same was done to his left ear. Jamie was left to relax for a while as the needles did their work. Mr. Lowe read a magazine, and Jamie, though conscious of the needles hanging from his ears, sat in his chair and stared through the windows. He saw bright sunlight, bright colours and streets lined with trees and many kinds of brilliant flowers. He could see tourists buying delicious snacks from street sellers. Shops displayed everything from pots and pans to paper toys, often outside where curious shoppers could see more easily. Everywhere he looked, it seemed there were large paper signs in letters of red and gold, advertising the latest festival. People were not dressed for the cold and wet. They were wearing light summer clothes, and only wore hats to shade themselves from the sun. Jamie thought about his life as it had been only 2 weeks before. He thought of the views he had then from his office windows, the grey winter skies, the wet, crowded streets, and the few miserable leafless trees which lined the streets of the London suburb he worked in. At 5 in the evening he would have been looking forward to the end of his working day at the small college where he had taught business studies for the last 10 years. He would be lighting up his 20th cigarette since breakfast, and looking forward to another cup of strong coffee before he finally went back to his lonely apartment. He had been bored. Bored. His whole life had felt grey. How completely different that was from the view which now met his eyes. Jamie Russell was glad he had moved to Singapore. He felt so good about it, he had finally decided to give up smoking, with a little help from Mr. Lowe's acupuncture centre. He had always wanted to give up the harmful habit, but had somehow always found a reason to continue, such as the stress of work or the end of yet another failed relationship with a girlfriend. This time it was serious. It would be in keeping with the fresh start he had made in his life as a lecturer in a respected Singapore college. New job, new life. And what better way to give up than through the use of the ancient art of acupuncture? After all, it has been used in the East for over 1,000 years. Acupuncture involves the use of fine needles placed into particular points on the body that are said to be the focus of important channels of life energy called qi. The needles then direct this qi into its proper place. It is said that many illnesses and bad habits are the result of qi being disturbed or blocked. Acupuncture tries to correct such disturbances and clear the blocked qi. That's what they say. 10 minutes later, Mr. Lowe removed the needles from Jamie's ears. Jamie stood up and stretched his arms. He was not sure what his ears had to do with his smoking, but he was prepared to trust the expert advice of Mr. Lowe. Why shouldn't he? "How do you feel now, Mr. Russell?" asked Mr. Lowe. He was a short man who appeared to be about 60, and he had to look up to speak to the tall figure of Jamie. "Do you still want a cigarette?" Jamie was disappointed to discover that he did want a cigarette, but he was too polite to say so. Instead, he arranged for further treatment in 3 days' time. In the meantime, he had to take some horrible-looking powder and drink it in hot water at home. "It will help to direct your qi," Mr. Lowe promised him. When Jamie got home and tasted it, he nearly spat it out. It tasted like mud. But he was determined to finish it, and finish it he did. Normally, his first reaction to unpleasant experiences was to have a smoke. To his surprise, he found he did not experience his usual automatic desire to reach out for a cigarette. He still wanted one, but he did not feel as if he would go crazy without one. He could manage. Over the next 3 days at work in the college, he smoked only 4 cigarettes instead of his usual packet a day. Even then, he felt guilty about it. Normally, he would feel like climbing up the walls if he didn't have a smoke at least once every hour. Was the acupuncture treatment working? It seemed to be. The next visit to Mr. Lowe repeated the treatment. The results were, as far as Jamie was concerned, marvellous. He felt no desire at all for a cigarette after the second visit. He took the awful-tasting powder just to be safe, but the need for a smoke did not return. If anything, the thought of smoking a cigarette now made him feel quite sick. The acupuncture had worked. In fact, it had worked so wonderfully well that Jamie wanted to find out more about it. What else could it do? If it could stop bad habits, could it also encourage good ones? He decided to talk to Mr. Lowe. Jamie's new job was going well. He liked his hard-working students, and they seemed to like him. He found he was feeling more awake and full of life. He no longer minded all the marking of books and preparation of lessons and long meetings that had previously been so tiring for him. He also started to notice how few local people actually smoked. Before then, he had not really cared, so long as he could have a cigarette. Now he began to understand just how unpleasant the smelly things were. That's how he thought of cigarettes now, as smelly things that were both antisocial and disgusting. He was even avoiding the strong coffee he had previously thought to be essential. Alcohol, once a regular part of his life, had also been put away forever. And it was all thanks to Mr. Lowe and his little needles. Jamie visited the acupuncture clinic every week. He was beginning to look forward to the feel of the fine needles in his skin. He enjoyed waiting quietly in his chair while the marvellous needles did their work. He even enjoyed staring through the windows while he thought about his changing fortunes. Jamie was getting to know Mr. Lowe quite well. He asked him about acupuncture and other Eastern treatments. He was surprised at the depth of Mr. Lowe's knowledge. Mr. Lowe had studied acupuncture for most of his long life. He was actually much older than Jamie had thought him to be. Much older. Could this be because of his skills? Jamie wanted to know more. Perhaps he could be taught some of these skills. Then he would be able to use them on himself. Why not? He asked Mr. Lowe where he could learn acupuncture. To Jamie's delight, Mr. Lowe offered to teach him himself. The cost was very reasonable, and Jamie was glad to accept. Lessons were arranged, and Jamie made sure he attended them regularly. He was an enthusiastic student. Acupuncture had rid Jamie of many of his bad habits. He was beginning to think he would no longer have any bad habits to treat. After a while, Jamie felt sure he could start treating himself, improving himself. He did not want Mr. Lowe to know about this in case he upset the old man. After all, he might see it as a sign of disrespect if Jamie stopped seeing him for his personal treatment. Besides, Mr. Lowe might not like it. He had ideas about acupuncture and other Eastern studies which, to Jamie's way of thinking, were old-fashioned. One evening, during a lesson, Jamie asked Mr. Lowe what he could do to increase his ability to think, to become more intelligent. "What do you want to do that for?" asked Mr. Lowe, much to Jamie's surprise. "Well, I could do my work better," said Jamie. "You do your work well already, as far as I can tell," Mr. Lowe told him. "And you already have a good brain. I can see that. The mind and the body should be in balance. Why spoil it by overdeveloping a brain that is good already, eh? No, my friend. The qi is meant to be in balance in body and mind. Do not upset that balance. What happens when we lose our balance? We fall over." And he laughed. Jamie smiled. He liked Mr. Lowe, but Mr. Lowe was old, with old ideas. And they were not ideas that Jamie shared. Jamie Russell was 34 years old. He was still single, though he had not yet given up hope of meeting the right girl. But there was no romance in his life. His job seemed somehow to take up all his time and energy. He had been unhealthy and unhappy. At least that was how it used to be. Not anymore. Now, just 1 year after beginning his study of acupuncture, it seemed to Jamie that he felt fit and happy at last. He no longer smoked or drank alcohol. He had given up coffee. The only thing he did drink, apart from water, was tea. His body looked firm and fit, and his dark brown hair shone with health. It was a pity about Mr. Lowe. Why did the old man get so angry about the progress he had been making? Jamie could not see anything wrong in wanting to improve himself, in making himself better, even superior. What was the problem? Things finally reached a crisis when Jamie said he wanted to use his qi to influence his students so that they would never forget what he told them. Mr. Lowe had refused to help him any more. "You cannot do this foolish thing," Mr. Lowe had said to him. "You must not disturb the natural way of the qi. It goes against all I have taught you. If you insist on this foolish action, you will be my student no longer." It was clear to Jamie that Mr. Lowe, the master, was becoming jealous of his student. It was sad, but perhaps it was for the best. Jamie stopped going to Mr. Lowe's lessons. He had learnt enough at least to know that he had to find other ways of perfecting his skills. The use of needles was not always practical. He couldn't use them at work or when he was travelling around. There were times when Jamie wanted to increase his qi, so that he could give himself that extra rush of energy he often wanted. He could hardly produce a set of needles and start sticking them into himself while he was at work or on the bus. No, acupuncture did not have all the answers he wanted. But perhaps acupressure might. Acupressure doesn't need needles. Instead, it uses either special sticks or, even easier, the fingers to apply pressure to points of qi in the body. The principles are exactly the same as acupuncture, so Jamie did not feel that he had to start from the beginning again. He was confident that he could learn this new skill quickly. He did not feel the need for a teacher this time. He would teach himself. Why not? So he did. He got out all the books he could find on acupressure and studied them. He looked things up on the internet. Soon he knew how to apply acupressure quickly and successfully without attracting attention to himself. This was impossible if needles were used. Jamie soon found he could do all the work he needed to do at the college in a quarter of the time he used to take. He also had at least 10 times more energy than he had had before. There was lots of energy left over for his own studies, for his own improvement. Lots. People were beginning to talk about him. His amazing ability to work hard and never get tired was frequently mentioned. These comments were never unkind, and he remained popular with both staff and students, though he was well known for expecting more work from his students than other members of staff. There had even been a few students leaving the course because they could not take the stress of the work. This was a pity, but after all, standards had to be kept up. His interest in Eastern matters was no secret, though Jamie did not deliberately draw attention to it. His colleagues admired a man who was enthusiastic about his work, and they liked the fact that a Westerner showed such an interest in Eastern culture. Jamie was becoming quite well known as somebody who knew about such things. Students would ask him for advice instead of going to their local experts. Jamie never asked for money. Once, after he had successfully treated a student's headache with acupressure, he was called to see the head of the college. He was told, kindly but firmly, that he was to leave treatments to those who had licenses to do such things. Jamie made sure he never made that mistake again. It was soon after this that Adrian Tong, the physics lecturer, asked Jamie if he was interested in the art of Tai Chi. Adrian was a friendly man, about the same age as Jamie, who always dressed smartly. He was a popular member of the college staff, known for his helpful nature. He mentioned it to Jamie as they were preparing to go home. Jamie was interested. He had heard of Tai Chi, which was made up of slow, elegant exercises that developed the Qi and made it stronger. Every morning in the park, he saw people of all ages performing the exercises, gently moving their arms and legs like trees in a soft wind. Amongst them was a pretty young woman who Jamie thought was very elegant indeed. Yes, it did look like a good way to relax. "My uncle is considered to be a master of this art," Adrian told him. "I am sure he would welcome such a keen student as yourself." And so Jamie became a student of Master Tong. Master Tong was a slim, young-looking man, though he was over 60 years old. He was amazed by Jamie's knowledge of Eastern culture and agreed to teach him, though he would have to take his place with the rest of his students, all 73 of them, in the park at dawn each day. That suited Jamie. It would be a good start to the day. The first lesson began the very next morning. The park was next to the local shops. Many items were delivered to the shops at the start of the day, and the roads were already busy with small lorries delivering vegetables, newspapers, and all kinds of things needed for the day's business. Master Tong's class had been going through their elegant motions for 20 minutes or so when the loud sound of screaming brakes was heard. A child had run in front of a delivery lorry. The lorry had turned sharply and fallen onto its side, trapping the driver, who had tried to jump clear. He was alive, but his legs were trapped under the lorry door. He was calling out for help and was obviously in great pain. What happened next amazed Jamie. Master Tong ran to the lorry, took a deep breath, and pushed up with both hands against the side of the lorry. What was the old man thinking of? What could he do? The lorry was not large, but it was not something to be pushed away like an empty box. But he lifted it up. Master Tong held up the lorry while other willing hands pulled the driver away. Only after the driver was safe did he let go. The lorry sank down with a heavy sound of metal. Master Tong sat down, a little red in the face, but not hurt by his efforts. But Jamie had no time to talk to him, as he was needed by the injured driver. He used his acupressure skills to reduce the poor man's pain until he could be taken to hospital. Jamie noticed a young woman by his side. It was the pretty woman from the Tai Chi class. She was busy talking to the injured man and helping him to relax. Their eyes met briefly, and she smiled at him before she left to get more help. When the ambulance arrived, Jamie saw that the Tai Chi class had begun again. People were gently moving in the new morning light, all following Master Tong. The next day, Jamie got to his Tai Chi class early. He wanted to speak to Master Tong before the class began. Jamie saw him already doing his exercises next to a large banyan tree. Master Tong saw him and smiled. "Always exercise next to a tree," he said. "Trees are good for the chi." Jamie looked at the slightly built man who was smiling at him. Could he really have moved that lorry by himself? Master Tong saw his face and answered for him. "You need not be so surprised by what happened yesterday, my friend. You ought to know from your studies that the chi can be a practical tool, a way of finding outer as well as inner strength." "Yes, but I never thought," Jamie began. Master Tong again seemed to read his mind. "You never thought that a gentle form of exercise such as Tai Chi could produce such results, yes?" "Well, yes," answered Jamie. "Observe," said Master Tong. Jamie saw him go through one of the more complicated exercises at the normal speed. The exercise involved movements that looked like elegant kicks and punches. "Observe again," Master Tong told him. This time the exercise was performed much faster. Master Tong moved with a speed and power that took Jamie's breath away. There was nothing gentle about this. "One side gentle, one side strong. Both are the same. Both are part of the chi. You understand now?" "I think so," said Jamie. "You used the gentle side of the chi yourself when you treated the injured man for his pain. That is good. We both use the chi when it is needed. That is balance. That is good. Okay?" Jamie nodded. He had seen something that would stay in his mind forever. He had seen strength as well as elegance. He had also seen power, and it was beautiful in his eyes. It was a few months after Jamie's talk with Master Tong when Adrian approached Jamie. He and Jamie often talked together after work before they went home. "My uncle tells me you're one of his best students," Adrian told him. "But I've only been with him for a few months," said Jamie. "Exactly. He says you've learned more in a few months than most do in a few years. How do you do it, Jamie?" "Just lucky, I suppose," said Jamie. They both laughed, but Jamie didn't add any more to explain his answer, though he wasn't sure why. Adrian was too polite to ask again before he went home. Jamie spent most of his time on studying and practicing his skills. He would apply acupressure or sometimes needles to his skin in order to increase his qi. He needed more energy if he was to do all the things he wanted. And he wanted a lot. Most of all, he wanted power. He wanted the power of his qi to fill his being. He didn't ask himself why he wanted it. He never questioned his desire for it, a desire that seemed to grow as naturally as his power grew. But as his power grew, his wisdom didn't. Jamie was still doing well at the college. He was now head of the business studies department. The 3 other lecturers who were in the department liked Jamie, but he expected a lot from them. They wondered how he could work so hard. No matter how much they did, he always seemed to be doing more. Jamie's department was becoming well known for its excellent examination results. But his students, though they liked and respected Jamie, found that keeping up with all the work he wanted them to do was almost impossible. That is, if they expected to eat and sleep. Jamie himself knew well enough that his expectations were beginning to be too much for his students and staff. He decided that something needed to be done about it. Of course, they could all join Master Tong's Tai Chi classes. Why not? Jamie was feeling quite excited at the idea of his staff and students joining in the classes every morning. He never stopped to think that they might have other things to do with their lives, that they might have families to be with, or homes to look after, or even other jobs to do. He had not felt excited by anything in this way for some time. He was usually calm and in control of his feelings. He would speak to Master Tong about it tomorrow. But tonight he decided to walk home by way of the shopping centre, past all the bright shops and the colourful lights he had always found so cheerful. It was his way of celebrating. But there were others who were also celebrating that night, and they were far from being calm. 5 men were sitting at an outdoor table in a street cafe next to the pavement. They had been drinking too much beer. One of them saw Jamie walking past and called out to him.
"Hey, mate, do you speak English?"
Jamie looked at the man. He was big and was speaking too loudly. "Yes," said Jamie politely. "I am English. Can I help you?" The men all shouted and laughed, repeating, "I am English," in a rude way that was meant to sound like him. Jamie ignored this.
"Yeah, mate, you can have a beer with us. It's my mate's birthday and I'm buying the drinks. You're my guest. You can drink to his health too."
"No thanks," said Jamie. "I don't drink beer, only water and tea." The other men all laughed loudly, but the first man got angry.
"I'm not asking you, mate. I'm telling you. Now drink."
The man pushed a beer can in front of Jamie's face. Jamie calmly turned away and began to walk off. He did not want to become involved with these men. The man reached out and roughly grabbed Jamie's shoulder. Jamie didn't even think about his next action. He turned quickly and pushed upwards with both hands against the man's chest. The man went up into the air and landed on another table, knocking over beer cans and breaking glasses. He did not get up. Jamie could hardly believe what he had done. He had not meant to do anything violent. Now a man was hurt. The 4 other men looked at the fallen man in horror. This quickly turned to anger as they got up and attacked Jamie. They were all shouting angrily at him as they did so. Some had bottles in their hands, and one had picked up a heavy wooden chair. Jamie had not asked for this. He had not wanted to hurt anyone. Now 4 large drunken men were attacking him. Something seemed to break inside Jamie's mind at that moment. It seemed to him as if the men were moving in slow motion. It was easy to avoid their punches, easy to hit them in places he knew would make them unconscious for a long time. It was just after the 4th man had gone down that he felt a sudden pain in his back. The floor rushed towards him. All the world went black, and he knew no more. Jamie's head hurt. He opened his eyes. The light hurt his eyes at first. He began to make out a face. It was the face of a woman. She was smiling at him. His eyes became more used to the light, and he could see that the woman was a nurse. She had a nice face, a beautiful face. It seemed familiar. "How are you feeling, Mr. Russell?" the nurse asked. "I feel awful," said Jamie. "My back hurts." "I'll get you something for the pain, Mr. Russell. Just wait a moment." "No," Jamie said with more force than he had intended. "I don't need any drugs. Just give me a minute." Only then did Jamie realize that he could not move his arms or legs. No matter how hard he tried to move, they remained still. He felt confused, sick and afraid. "Please, Mr. Russell, relax. I'll take care of things," said the nurse, as she dried the sweat on his forehead. As she leaned over, Jamie saw from the badge she was wearing that her name was Angie Lee. Her hand was cool, and her touch was light. She smiled at him. Then he remembered her. She was the pretty woman from the Tai Chi class who had helped the injured lorry driver. He managed to smile back. "What happened, nurse? How did I get here?" "Here is Dr. Sim. He'll tell you all you need to know, Mr. Russell." Dr. Sim was a young man, younger than Jamie, but he spoke with the calm authority of a professional. "A man hit a heavy chair against your backbone, Mr. Russell. He injured your back and would have done more damage if the police hadn't arrived to stop him. It seems you got into a fight and put 4 of his friends into hospital before he did the same to you. Witnesses say the men started the trouble, and you were trying to protect yourself. Rather well, too, until that chair hit you." "But I can't move my arms or legs," cried Jamie. "We don't want you to, Mr. Russell. We have to keep your back still while it mends," said Dr. Sim. Jamie now realized that his whole body was being held still. Even his head was being held by something. Dr. Sim continued, "If you were to move now, you could be damaged forever." Forever. Jamie heard the word, but it did not seem real to him. Be calm, he told himself. Be in control. Will I get better?" he asked. "Indeed you will," said Dr. Sim, "providing you remain absolutely still for at least 2 months.
We have to make sure your back mends fully before we can consider allowing you to move. But you should have made a full recovery by then. So, don't worry. Enjoy the rest."
Dr. Sim went on to his next patient. Jamie felt that life had played a cruel trick on him. All that time spent on perfecting his body and his mind, and now he couldn't even get out of bed. He felt foolish and rather sorry for himself. At that moment, Nurse Angie Lee returned with some medicine for Jamie. He needed it. After a few days, he was allowed to see visitors. Adrian and Master Tong came to see him. Adrian talked about college and said how much Jamie was missed, while Master Tong sat and said nothing. Adrian, after a nod from his uncle, then said goodbye and left. Master Tong remained sitting by Jamie's bed, looking at him. Jamie wondered what he was thinking about, but did not want to ask him. Finally, Master Tong spoke.
"I have been speaking to a friend of mine about you. He knows you well."
"Yes? Who's that?"
"Mr. Lowe. He is concerned about you. You were his student once, I understand."
"Why is he concerned?" asked Jamie, but he had a feeling he already knew.
"He could see something was happening to you. I could see it myself. I had hoped that the gentle side of your chi would correct the imbalance."
"The imbalance?"
"Yes," said Master Tong. "The power of your chi was rising up like a snake. You were losing control of it, upsetting the balance. Why else do you think you got into that ridiculous fight with those men? You have skill, but no wisdom. Why do you think it takes a lifetime to learn these things, huh? You want to know everything all at once. You think you can do everything by yourself. We could see that. But you are young. You can still learn. If you don't kill yourself first."
And Master Tong laughed.
"I know you won't be able to move for a while, but they tell me you will make a good recovery. And if you use your chi, you should recover even faster. Enjoy your rest. Now you have a chance to examine your mistakes. Look at your life and consider how to balance your chi properly."
Just then, Nurse Angie Lee arrived and waited respectfully while Master Tong was speaking.
"And not all teachers are old men," Master Tong continued. "Your lessons begin now. I expect to see you back at my classes when you leave this place."
Master Tong walked away. Jamie's eyes followed him as he walked through the door. Could Master Tong be right? "Are you ready, Jamie?" said Nurse Angie. It was time for her to wash him. Jamie liked Nurse Angie's cheerful company. She seemed to like him. He knew he liked her. He liked her very much. She smiled at him, and he smiled back. Jamie closed his eyes and relaxed. Maybe Master Tong was right. Maybe his lessons were only just beginning. He felt Angie's touch, and it was cool and gentle. Gentle as a feather.